Of the media. My name is Jeremy Michaels. We want to welcome you to the Solidarity Fund's fourth monthly media conference since the fund was launched on the 23rd of March 2020. And thanks so much for taking time to attend the briefing. In the interests of accountability and transparency, the fund regularly provides these updates and general updates on its work to stakeholders and particularly the public. So to this end, we regularly post updates on our website, www.solidarityfund.co.za. And so we encourage you to please visit the site for regular updates in between these media briefings, or to contact us directly, and the contact details are there on the website. With that, I'd like to introduce our panel who will be presenting to you today. Firstly, we'll hear from the fund's chairman, Mrs. Gloria Sirobe. Then we'll hear from the interim Chief Executive Officer, Nomkhita Ngweni. And finally, we'll have a presentation from Dr. Jonathan Broomberg, heads up the health interventions. We'll circulate a media statement immediately after the briefing. And after the presentations, we'll have a Q&A session. So let's get straight into it. Over to you, Chairman.
Thank you very much, Jeremy. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you for joining us today as we give you an update of where the fund is at this moment. It has been 4 months since the first case of COVID-19 in South Africa was discovered on the 5th of March, 2020. And 2 weeks later, on the 23rd of March, the President announced establishment of the Solidarity Fund as a rapid response to augment the work of government as they fight the pandemic side by side with business. The response of the South Africans and our international allies to this Solidarity Fund to express their support financially and in kind was quite overwhelming. We cannot express our gratitude enough. And so we therefore come to you today, 4 months later, to give an account, an update of what has been done up to now. The CEO will take you through the report, but perhaps I can give you two examples of some of the, what I would call the impactful initiatives that we have had. One is we were trying to navigate through what this pandemic meant for the rural South Africa. We formed a meaningful relationship and partnership with the National House of Traditional Leaders. This highlighted the challenges they were facing in the rural areas, especially the rural Eastern Cape, with the behavior around the funerals and large gatherings. The lockdown meant that they are not in a position to have the large meetings and imbizos as they normally do to address issues of this nature. At their request, we procured love mailers for each of their 882 traditional councils countrywide to serve as a powerful communication tool. The first of these have already been dispatched to Eastern Cape at the request of the chairman of the National House of Traditional Leaders, because it's the one that looks like more in trouble. And this is to cover as much of their hotspots as possible: Buffalo City, Chris Hani, O.R. Tambo, Alfred Nzo, Madu, and all the 6 kingdoms of the Eastern Cape. The balance is expected early in August to cover all the provinces, all the 882 traditional councils. The second example is our response to what was now the going back to school kind of program, and specifically the medical students from 4th year to 6th year and those in allied health sciences to resume clinical blocks and complete their studies. As a fund, we actually felt this was a fragile spot because on the one hand, we do need them to finish. On the other hand, they are going to start getting into wards and deal with patients. And so at the discussion with the deans of the universities, we dispatched over 1 million surgical masks as protective clothing to all the 9 medical schools all over the country. These are just the examples of some of the activities we've been involved in the 4 months. I will now hand over to our CEO, Nomkhita, who will give an overview of the fund's activities to date. Over to you, Nomkhita.
Thank you very much, Gloria, Madam Chairman, and good afternoon, everyone. And as Gloria said, once again, we are grateful to you for making the time today to join us as we continue to ensure that we update you on the activities of the fund, because the fund is the fund that belongs to South Africans. And firstly, may I say that it is befitting that we are hosting this briefing on the eve of International Mandela Day. As an icon, I think we can all agree that Madiba absolutely embodied the attributes of selflessness, patience, and determination. And never have these values been more relevant to help us unite and overcome as a nation as we witness the devastating impact of COVID-19 on our health system and the livelihoods of millions of people across our country. Amidst this, as the chairman has alluded, the Solidarity Fund continues to have a measurable positive impact across its key interventions and areas of work, which are in the health response, which we'll hear a lot more about today, the humanitarian relief efforts, and importantly, building social solidarity. The fund has played a catalytic role in responding to the immediate impact of the pandemic on the health system by procuring critical medical equipment and PPE for healthcare workers and community workers, and has also expanded testing capacity. We have disbursed tens of thousands of food parcels to vulnerable households, putting food on the table of those who are most affected by the pandemic. The fund's behavioral change campaign, which invites us to be citizens in solidarity, continues to spread the messages that we must continue to wash our hands, to protect our neighbors, wear our masks to protect our friends, and keep a safe distance to protect our families. As Gloria has mentioned, we have partnered with various organizations and networks to amplify our behavioral change campaign to ensure maximum reach and impact. For example, our Return to Work campaign and platform has been developed to enable a safe return to work through providing step-by-step guidance and resources to businesses and various sectors on how to reopen and stay open safely during the COVID-19 pandemic. We continue to work and partner with civil society and community constituencies, particularly in the hotspot provinces, through the deployment of neighborhood agents that are ambassadors and custodians to encourage participation and adherence at the community level for the life-saving behavioral changes, such as the wearing of masks and the regular hand washing. Now, what better way to demonstrate these behavioral changes than on International Mandela Day, where we will be hosting for the first time in the country the 3-team cricket formation through the delivery of the inaugural Solidarity Cup. In support of fighting the twin pandemics of COVID-19 and gender-based violence, our country's most prominent and decorated cricket players will play as citizens in solidarity in the first live sports match to be broadcast since the country went into lockdown, to support the amplification of the importance of the message of slowing down the spread of COVID-19. The match will observe all the necessary health protocols and serve as an opportunity to remind ourselves as South Africans of the unifying nature of sport, as well as pay tribute to Madiba's legacy. We firmly believe that behavioral change campaign plays an impactful role in helping us to curb infections and ultimately ease the strain on our health system. Now, we've said that this is our 4th month of existence of a fund, and it is through the collaboration across different sectors of government, business, civil society, that the Solidarity Fund has been able to move with speed onto the 2nd phase of our interventions. You will hear about some of those today, and as I've said earlier, these are largely around our health work and the health response. Now, to remind you of the great contributions that South Africa has made towards the Solidarity Fund. To date, the fund has received 3 billion in pledges, with almost the full amount almost already converted and deposited into the bank accounts, thanks to the commitment and generosity of South Africans. We are grateful to have had more than 298,000 individuals who have donated through direct deposits, various payment platforms, and also through salary sacrifice, or what we call payroll giving, to the fund, and over 2,000 corporates, trusts, government, who have also donated generously towards the fund's activities. To date, the fund has fully allocated more than 2.2 billion to fund initiatives that aim to prevent, support, detect, and care for those affected by the COVID-19 pandemic. 1.9 billion of the amounts that I've spoken about has been earmarked for our health response. Now, given where we are in the phase of the pandemic and the stress that we see and read about in the health system, we thought it would be important today to focus on the work and the impact that the fund has had in terms of the health response. And with that, I'd like to hand you over to our colleague, Dr. Jonathan Broomberg, who is the lead of the fund's activities around the health response, obviously supported by various team members. Jonathan, if I may hand over to you for you to provide us with the insights on our activities in this space.
Thanks very much, Nomkhita. Good afternoon, everybody, and thanks again for joining us today. As I think you're all aware, the statistics are now clearly showing that the true impact of the COVID-19 pandemic is upon us. The number of infections in our country is now well over, and very sadly, more than 4,000 of our fellow citizens have died from the disease. While the peak seems to be perhaps just behind us in the Western Cape, it's certainly ahead of us in many other provinces, specifically Gauteng and the Eastern Cape, and perhaps the others as well. And Clearly, therefore, the response from the Solidarity Fund has been strongly focused on the health response. And from the beginning, we have focused that on three particular elements. Firstly, care. Secondly, the detection of the disease and prevention. Much of our work, as you would imagine, has focused on care and detection. Let me start off with the care aspect and share some details with you. At the outset and during the level 5 lockdown, the first phase of the fund's intervention was strongly focused on securing adequate quantities of PPE, specifically for healthcare workers and community care workers, as well as ordering long in advance 200 ventilators, which are shortly on their way to the country. I'm glad to tell you that the bulk of the PPE has arrived timeously. Much of it has already been dispatched to the provinces. And thus far, the fund has distributed almost 20 million units of PPE, including gloves, gowns, masks, sanitizers, face shields, etc. These are then allocated by the National Department of Health to the provinces and to specific healthcare facilities according to need and requirements. Also in accordance with our principle of solidarity in action and rapid response, we received a request from the medical schools for additional PPE to protect health students, medical students and other health professional students in their latter years who were going back into the wards after the lockdown. And the fund donated over 1 million surgical masks to the 9 million medical schools across the country in response to that request. Of course, there are rigorous governance and quality assurance procedures to ensure that the PPE meets both global standards of the WHO and our National Department of Health standards. And we do make sure that no PPE is distributed unless it has strictly passed all the required tests. Having done a lot of work in regard to PPE, the fund is then starting to evaluate the next phase of our work, which clearly needed to be pointed largely towards the public hospital system, given, as we saw, the rising number of infections, and with that, the increasing burden of admissions on the public hospital system. I think many of you will be aware of the modeling that's been done by the Department of Health, which clearly shows a predicted demand of over 100,000 general ward beds and over 26,000 critical care beds as some of the larger provinces reach the peak of the pandemic. And this is going to inevitably lead to significant gaps in the number of beds and in the equipment to support those beds. And we've been working very closely with the National Department of Health and through the department with the provincial structures to truly understand where the needs and demands are and how the fund can support them. Just last week, the fund approved 405 million rand of funding to procure critical medical equipment in the current hotspots of Gauteng, Eastern Cape and Western Cape. These will go towards a number of elements of equipment. I can give you some details on that. An additional 760 ventilators and respiratory support devices across all of those provinces. Of course, this is in addition to the CPAP ventilators, which I'll discuss later, that are being locally manufactured. In addition to those respiratory support devices, almost 40,000 items of hospital equipment to equip 2 new field hospitals that are being erected in Gauteng at Nasrec and in Tshwane. So 2 new field hospitals, and the fund is providing the funding to procure the equipment for those, as well as another 12,500 items of critical care equipment, things like ICU monitors and similar equipment for COVID-19 designated hospitals in the Eastern Cape and Western Cape. So we hope that that response will support the significant needs of those 3 provinces as they start moving into the peak of the epidemic. We thought it's also important and useful to point out to you that at the beginning and before the crisis that we're all facing, South Africa imported about 92% of all medical equipment, including PPE, and only 8% was locally produced. And so part of the focus of the fund has been to leave some kind of legacy when this awful pandemic is behind us, and therefore to start investing as much as possible in local manufacturing, of course, while ensuring that the response remained timely and able to meet the timelines of the demand. For this reason, the fund has invested 250 million towards the local manufacturing of 20,000 non-invasive CPAP ventilators. This is being done through the National Ventilator Project. The majority of these will be manufactured by the CSIR and some by a consortium of other manufacturers. These are now in production, and we hope that some of these will reach the clinical frontline in the near future, and then the rest of the 20,000 will be manufactured continuously to support the public hospital system right across the country. I did mention that detection, in other words, laboratory testing for COVID has been a critical part of our response from the beginning. One of the very first grants made by the fund was for an amount of 250 million to support our National Health Laboratory Service to procure the reagents and the tests that it needs, and to allow it to dramatically increase the number of tests that are being done. In light of what became clear to be processing backlogs, even with the increased capacity of the National Health Laboratory Service, the fund invested a further 88 million to capacitate the laboratories in 7 universities around the country to expand the capacity of the NHLS testing program. So these 7 universities include historically disadvantaged institutions, as well as established universities, and they are now scaling up to support the NHLS using their own virology laboratories. We have also provided a grant of 26 million rand to support a network of community pharmacies and GPs who will be offering COVID-19 testing to healthcare workers. We're very concerned, obviously, that rapid turnaround of test results for healthcare workers is very critical, and so we're delighted to partner with community pharmacies and GPs across the country to provide this additional support to healthcare workers. We will continue to work on strategies for tracking and tracing to look at further impacts. We're very interested in further support to small-scale local manufacturing of PPE and other medical equipment to leave a legacy behind. And there are some other proposals in the pipeline. But that concludes the summary of what's been done to date. And with that, Nomkhita, let me hand back to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Jonathan, and I think also to the broader team for that update, and of course for your dedicated efforts to make an impact and augment our country's response as we go through this pandemic within the limitations of the resources that we have. And I think quite importantly for us, it's also important to say thank you to South Africans for your continued support through the generosity of your contributions, and for uniting behind us in solidarity to enable us to be able to execute some of the work that Jonathan was alluding to earlier. And I think that it would be remiss of me to not assure you that we strive to ensure that there is absolutely great diligence and adherence to the highest and strictest levels of governance in how we administer the funds and donations that the fund receives. And so, Chairman, if you may allow me to conclude and thank everybody for attending and for joining us this afternoon, and to say that, yes, indeed, we may be facing challenging times, However, through all of us embracing the behavioral changes needed by staying at home, wearing our masks, washing our hands, and keeping our distance, we can make a real difference in how this pandemic impacts our collective future. And I do believe that this is the example that Madiba would have wanted us to set. And so with that, Chairman, I'd like to hand over to the moderator, to Jeremy, to facilitate any questions that we may have. And I'd also like to make the point that our broader team from the Solidarity Fund is here with us to answer any questions in case there are some questions that go beyond what it is that we've presented. And as we've said, that we will continue with the tradition of having these updates, and we have planned a deep dive into our humanitarian efforts, which will be our next installment of this feedback. And with that, Jeremy, I'd like to hand back over to you.
Thanks so much. Members of the media, we have posted a message to say that you can use the Q&A tab to pose questions. So you're welcome to do that now. And of course, given that this is a media briefing, only journalists will be allowed to ask questions. We'll take them in batches of 5. And please don't forget to identify yourself and the organization you represent when you pose the question. Okay, so we have one question thus far. I'm not sure who it's from, so if the person who's posed the question can please identify themselves. But the question is, will the fund publish all disbursements on its website as well as donations? Are there any other questions? Let's give it a few seconds. I'm sure someone is typing frantically.
Jeremy, I'm happy to answer the first question as you receive the other questions. Is that okay?
Okay. Just one more from Genevieve Quintal from Business Day. She says she's seeking clarity. Is the 1.9 billion rand earmarked for health coming out of the 3 billion rand pledged? So we have 2 questions. Let's take those, Nomkhita.
Okay, I can answer both of those questions, Jeremy. Thank you very much, colleagues, for the questions. The first one, absolutely yes. As we've always said, that given that the Solidarity Fund exists because of the generosity and contributions and the collective unity in action of South Africans, it is absolutely our duty and responsibility to make sure that we are transparent and we report accordingly in terms of not only the work that we're doing in terms of the disbursements, but also in tracking exactly the impact of that. And so if you go onto our website, I believe the moderator has given the handle of the website, you will find detailed reports, for example, on the initial distribution of food parcels, which is quite comprehensive. Our latest report that is out there is also on the procurement of PPEs, and we continuously update our reports accordingly. And also the second part of the question was in relation to donations. Yes, we do publish and are transparent on where we receive donor funding from, to the extent that our donors have given us the permission for us to be able to disclose their identities, but this is largely in 99% of the case where our donors have been comfortable for them to be disclosed on the website. And so all of that information is on the website. And the second question is, yes, 3.9 0.02 billion is what has been pledged, and we've just collected actually almost close to that, 3 billion to date, and 1.9 billion has been allocated or pledged in terms of the health response. And I think that we've said before in previous briefings that in terms of our strategy and our resource allocation, we always had the view that a larger weighting of our resource allocation would need to go towards the health response, just because it is quite critical in terms of dealing with that, because it does mean that if we're able to help and augment in the health response, potentially, you know, the impacts on the humanitarian side, etc., are ameliorated. And so that is really what the strategy has been, and hence 1.9 has been allocated towards the health response.
Thanks. Thanks so much, Madam CEO Nomkhita. The next question comes from Christian Duplessis from Netwerk 24. He asks, can people still donate to the fund? And 2, what steps are being taken to ensure that there's no corruption within the fund? Over to you, Nomkhita.
Thank you, Jeremy. Yes, indeed. We welcome continuous contributions and donations to the fund, because it is only through these donations that we can be able to execute on the mandate and the work that the fund is trying to achieve, and also support and augment our country's response to COVID. And I think that in terms of the second question, as I said, you know, earlier in my closing remarks, I think it is quite important that South Africans are aware that we are really ensuring that we stick and maintain the highest and strictest levels of governance as it relates to how we disperse our funds. And there's various levels of controls and risk mitigation, not only in decision-making processes, but also in execution, in terms of the accountabilities, how we contract, how we try to ensure that we hold our suppliers to account as well, in terms of how the funds have been dispersed, to ensure that we are able to track and trace as much as possible exactly how each rand that South Africans have contributed is making a difference. We also have quite a comprehensive governance structure, starting with our board subcommittees that look at audit and risk, that scrutinize our disbursements decisions in the context of the disbursements board subcommittee, where all disbursements decisions get tabled, and also the oversight on fundraising through our fundraising committee. We also have said previously that we have adopted, you know, the 3 lines of defense risk model, where in addition, obviously, to the management and the board that provide the oversight, we also have external auditors, internal auditors, and legal teams that are continuously working with us on a pro bono basis, I must emphasize, in ensuring that everything that we do in the fund can stand up to scrutiny. So I would like to think that indeed we do try to ensure that we uphold the highest and levels and strictest governance levels within the fund.
Thanks very much, Nomkhita. Members of the media, any other questions? We don't see any. Okay, we have one from Azara Karim from News 24. She asks, you spoke about procuring equipment for the field hospitals. How much of this has actually reached these field hospitals? And if this equipment is still to be dispatched, when do you expect it to arrive?
Should I answer that one, Nomkhita?
Yes, please, Johnny. Thank you.
Thanks for that question, Azara. This proposal was only recently approved the contracts are now being finalized. These hospitals are being built as we speak, and the procurement will start, I would imagine, next week for this equipment. So it will start to be purchased and dispatched over the next, I would say, few weeks, and the hospitals are being established over that same period of time.
Thanks, Dr. Broomberg. Thanks, Jonathan. Are there any other questions? Is someone typing frantically? We'll give you a few seconds. It would seem not. Okay, we understand it's the virtual questioning is sometimes a bit difficult, but it would seem that there aren't any further questions. If you do have a question, please indicate urgently. Otherwise, we are going to close shortly. Okay. I think there are no indications of questions, so we really want to thank all members of the media for joining us this afternoon. On behalf of the Solidarity Fund, we want to encourage you to continue doing the good work that you're doing. Thanks also to the chairman, the acting CEO, and the head of the health response, humanitarian response. And yeah, I think we want to also encourage you to please stay safe, and we hope to see you at our next briefing. Thanks so much.